If you're involved in marketing or branding in any capacity across North America, and I would argue almost anywhere in the world, you would have heard the name Jill Nykoliation. She's a visionary leader, a trailblazer, who has constantly reinvented her path in life based on her passion and her pursuit.
I get really excited when it hasn't been done before. And people who are wondering what I'm doing, they're paved road people going, when is she going to get out of the grass? That must be terrifying. Where I look at them and go, aren't you bored?
We're going to learn about how she learned about branding at the dinner table, her rise through the ranks of Kraft, to founding one of the most successful ad agencies, and leading in a male-dominated world.
I made a deliberate decision to start showing up with my feminine. And I had a coach, and he said, now that you're restructuring, let's bring in an exec team that matches your energy, that's more balanced in the feminine. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
What I love about Jill's story, it's one of embracing the unknown and pushing boundaries. And we're going to dive into her personal journey and how she's turned adversity into opportunity, and why today her focus is creating positive change in our world.
When you're in your knowing, it just seems inevitable.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast, and ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Jill Nykoliation, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It was so wonderful getting together with you a few weeks ago, and I said, you have to come on Chatter That Matters. I'm so glad you agreed to do it. And what I loved about part of our chat is when you talked about the dining room table. And I'm a big advocate for parents to realize that what's discussed with their children at a young age very often becomes the defining tools that they have in their knapsack for life. So talk to me about your dining room table.
So I have 3 brothers, and my father was in marketing. He became a CEO, but he was in marketing, and around our table, that just became the language of, hey, Dad, what are you working on? Or he would talk about his day. And I remember understanding the power of brands. And specifically, here's one really juicy one he had, was he was at General Electric, GE, and GE had sold its small appliance division to Black & Decker. And he was tasked with, how do you put those 2 brands together? How do you get someone who buys a power drill to also want to have a curling iron from the same company, and vice versa? And he's like, this is really going to be tough. And I remember going, oh yeah, that guy's not going to want that. And that woman's not going to want that. And that was a brilliant case study that actually later came into Queens when I was there. So I remember that being, this isn't just a business. This is actually psychology, and having to put the consumer in the middle.
You mentioned Queens. From what I understand, this was a full court press in terms of your family going to Queens.
Yeah, it was. All 4 of us went there. And one year we were all there at the same time.
What's it like when you have that sort of family statement that you're making in a university? Is it easy for you because you've got strength in numbers, or is it difficult because it's hard to sort of create your own identity?
I created my own identity. I was very grateful that my brothers were there, because you always knew if you needed something or you'd bump into them, home was just around the corner. But no, I created my own identity. I think that started when I was young, and my parents very much encouraged that too.
Ken Wong, who's been on my show and arguably the greatest marketing professor this country's had, he's mentored so many people. It almost sounded like he was a little intimidated by a young Jill. It's just talking about how, you came to class prepared, but not in terms of did I do the work that was asked, but prepared to ask the questions that really mattered.
I have goosebumps in you saying this. He's legendary. I think what he remembers of me is my curiosity. How does that work? And what does that mean? And how does that build? And where do we go?
And again, I go back to the dinner room table, because there's a lot of times I find, and I've even witnessed it, where parents get frustrated because kids have so many questions. They just have this insatiable appetite for knowledge. And I'm sure it wears a lot of parents down. But I have to believe at your dinner table, the concept of being curious was something that was fueled and fostered and celebrated, as opposed to trying to compartmentalize.
It comes down to patience and interest. And I think when you come from genuine curiosity, we can try and find infinite patience for that. When people are curious and really want to know more, we should celebrate that.
The gauntlet at the end of that, the Queens is I want to get into Procter & Gamble or Unilever or Kraft or PepsiCo. I mean, companies are really known for their training, the best of the best. And you show up at Kraft. I might have my timing wrong, but it seems like almost overnight you go from the assistant brand manager deciding what font to use on the Jell-O package to working with the CEO. And I wish people could see your smile. I'm going to clip this because take me back. How did that happen? Because there's a lot of people that were stuck on that font for years, and you are going into the head office, the CEO's office.
My last 5 years, I was mentored in part by Irene Rosenfeld. I heard that there was this new program that she was cooking up. How do I get around the customer into the consumer? And for your listeners to go, well, Kraft sells food to people, but in between that is a customer, like the grocery stores. Kraft was spending 3 times as much with the customer than they were the consumer. So like shelving fees and stuff. So she was asking the question, how do we get around? And if we could just go to these people's homes, we could save so much money. We could talk so directly. But who are they? I don't know who buys Kraft dinner. I don't know who buys peanut butter. I don't know who buys literally by name. And so she said that would be just a fun assignment to work on. I need to create a database. There is no database, so we have to create one. And then when we get to their house and their postal code or their address and eventually their email, what are we going to say? I said I'd take on the whole messaging part of it. Someone else said I'll take on the data. Tony, no one else wanted the job. I was floored. What attracted me was 2 things. One was, this is such a puzzle and it's never been done before. Number 2 was, Irene said, you'll have access to me every Friday for 3 hours. And I just thought, what a massive gift, because she's brilliant and she's tough, widely respected. And I thought, it's like going to school. I get to have a class with her every Friday. And the assignment was interesting. So that's how I got there. I raised my hand.
This is a great lesson in life for everybody. Then it takes me to one of the first of the 3 principles we're going to talk about today with Jill Nykoliation, which is tall grass.
My analogy is there's paved road and there's tall grass. And each of us can do either. It's a matter of knowing, what am I really wired for? And most people, I've come to learn, are paved road. How does it work? How is it done? The road is paved with, is lined with filing cabinets of how-tos and case studies. That's an important part of this efficiency. And I can beat that. So for example, this is the Cheetos pack. I can make it a bit better next year. That's paved road. You're just making it slightly better. But a tall grass is, wow, what if we built something over there? Let's make a database and let's go to people's homes and let's create a whole recipe system and let's create magazines and let's create a TV show. And that sounds exciting. And I have no idea how to do that. And no one's done it before us. So you get your machete and you get in the grass and you whack it around. And sometimes you might poke your head out of the grass, Tony, and say, oh, wow, we're off course. It doesn't deter you. You go, okay, back in the grass, a little to the left. I quickly learned, like, oh, I get really excited when it hasn't been done before. And people who are wondering what I'm doing, they're paved road people going, when is she going to get out of the grass? That must be terrifying. Where I look at them and go, aren't you bored? And so you learn not to judge. But when I learned that I was a tall grass person, it was so freeing because then I understood myself. I'm like, oh, I can make these decisions. This is the right place for me to be. And I can tune out the naysayers.
But let's talk about that because you're about possibility. You're about positivity. This is what this podcast is about. How many times did people like that executive VP want to grab you by the ankles and pull you back on the road because they don't understand what you're doing? They want to know that you're on the path that they've set for you.
Lots of people did. And I think I look back and that's one of the patterns I can see for how did I keep doing that was learning to trust my inner voice and getting out of here. And if any listeners, my hands on my head and moving my thinking down to my heart, into my gut. And when I move my thinking down and I slow it down and I get quiet, it always leads me to my truth.
Here you are, Jill, you're wandering around in the tall grass at Kraft, and then one day you realize you're actually standing on pavement. It's getting quite repetitive and rinse and repeat. you decide to jump and go to a completely different sector, advertising, and you walk into an environment that looked good on the outside, but when you opened the kimono, was toxic, testosterone was roaring through that place. How do you come to terms with that? Because then I'm saying to you as a friend, Jill, that was a bad decision.
And that was jolting. Yes, I left Kraft. Our budget was over $100 million. I mean, I don't know if there's a marketer listening to this that has a budget of $100 million. And I left to go into advertising because it became this undeniable pull that I loved brand building so much. I needed to go to the other side to do it all the time. It was so jarring. I learned a ton. I stayed for 2 years. I stayed a year too long. And that's the lesson. What I learned there is I'm in the right side of the fence. That I knew, but I was at the wrong place. And I had not realized that places like that could exist.
So talk to me about people that find themselves in that. They're seduced by a job, a title, a salary, the beautiful red ribbon. But when they open the package and they walk into that culture, it is jolting. It is jarring. People are being marginalized.
So 2 things. One is don't ruminate or beat yourself up for the decision. I didn't see it because they didn't want me to see it. Those dark places, they hide it. They wouldn't exist otherwise. So that's one. Number 2 is go where you're wanted. Jealousy is really toxic. When you know you're not wanted, when you know it's not the right place, again, trust your knowing and say, I will make such a bigger difference at a place that's cheering me on. We're so glad you're here. Oh my gosh, you think differently. I don't always agree with you, but you're making it better. You're making me think. You'll do much more work there than in a place where the internal competitor is your fiercest competitor. And that's what I learned. The internal competition was choking and it was exhausting. And so that was my error, was I was trying to prove to myself that I could do this. I can stand. I can be successful. Why can't they see what I'm bringing in?
Jill, you first came on my radar when you made the move from the agency we won't name to the agency you named, which is Juniper Park. How did that come about?
At that place that shall not be named, I met some wonderful people that also were like, how did I get here? How did I not know this? And we really worked well together and we loved our talent connection and chemistry. And we still believed that there was a better way. And so we decided we created our own agency. It wasn't really some big master plan. It just felt like it was inevitable. We believed in the power of brands, not advertising, but the power of brands, which is different. And so we created this thing overnight and we scrambled and there's like 6 of us doing it at the very beginning. And that's how it came about was out of the friction of the last place.
You know, this is another major move. I mean, you leave the certainty of Kraft to the uncertainty of advertising. And then I would compound it by a factor of 10, becoming an entrepreneur. You're not part of a multinational network. You don't necessarily have people knocking at the door. How did it feel? I'm going to take a guess. It must be one of the most exciting times in your life when that small band started to make a lot of hit records.
It felt undeniable and it felt invincible because, again, when I get into my knowing and I know something's clicking, then you just go, oh, this is going to work. It's going to be a ton of work, but this is going to work. And I didn't really feel we had competitors because we had formed it, not just for advertising, but we had strategy, myself, design, which was Barry, and advertising, Terry and Ellen. And we were doing it differently for that time. And I was like, oh, we're in a category of one. Also, to your point about like it was a big leap, it was odd at the time. People were so fascinated that I was a woman starting an agency. And it sounds ridiculous now at 2024, but in 2007, she's a woman starting an agency and she's from client side. She has 2 years experience and she's starting an agent. What does she know? And wait, her first client is Frito-Lay in Dallas? What? And so I remember that people going, I'm sorry, how did this just happen? But I really felt people were cheering us on. And maybe I felt your energy too, Tony. I really did feel people were going, this is interesting. I'm going to watch.
You know, Jill, you just offhandedly said, and we walked into our first client was Frito-Lay in Dallas. I mean, this was a stranglehold by Omnicom, this holding company. Some of the top agencies were in that building. and you walk in, this sort of startup from Canada, and you started to rock and roll.
Andrew Robertson, who I adore, and he is right now the chairman of BBDO, he was just like, I don't know what you're doing here, but they love you. And we're losing stuff left, right, and center. And you're picking it up. And you're picking up assignments that we don't even know are available. And so, yeah, he's like, will you join us? And I actually said no. I'm like, no. And he was like, I'm sorry, what? Because you don't say no to Andrew Robertson. He's like the madman of the madmen. And I'm like, no, because you're so TV-centric. And he's like, okay, just be you. Stay you. But it was fascinating to have them wonder. And we were beating Goodby also. I mean, Goodby's an amazing agency still to this day. When you're in your knowing, it just seems inevitable.
When we return, put yourself in the footsteps of Jill. 1 minute you're winning awards, you're at the top of the game, and suddenly everything changes. Well, Jill and I discussed her journey through the tall grass, from health problems to pirate huddles to spreading gratitude to the rest of the world.
I now show up my whole self, not the business Jill or the compartmentalized Jill. I show up whole.
That's what's next on Chatter That Matters.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman, host of the podcast Chatter That Matters, and I'm here to give a big shout out to a long-standing partner of RBC, Women of Influence Plus. This is an organization that isn't here to change the narrative, it is here to rewrite it, to create a more inclusive tomorrow. And one of their biggest initiatives is the RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Awards. For over 3 decades, they've recognized and celebrated the strides of Canada's most accomplished, influential, and impactful women. It is the leading women's awards program in the nation, working to elevate their important contributions from economic growth to social change across sectors, across industries, and across Canada. Women of Influence Plus and the RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Awards, well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
If you really want to step into who you are and you really want to be your authentic self, you need to know who you are. Like one thing people say a lot is, I want to be authentic. I'm like, okay, authentically what? Because yes, you can be authentic. Do you know who you are? You go, who am I? And who am I now?
Today, my special guest is Jill Nykoliation. She's a force of positive energy, creativity, positivity, and a force to be listened to. You're doing so well at Juniper Park that, from what I understand, they want to now merge one of their other brands with you and have you take over the rudder. And this is where 2 other tools became part of the Jill knapsack. And the first one obviously would be the sense of masculine and feminine. And the other one was refounding.
Refounding is a mindset I use in my personal life as well. And so it came about when one day the CMO changed at PepsiCo US. And again, like this is like, we're a Canadian agency working in the US, bringing jobs to Canada. It was such a privilege. But the CMO changed and called and said, hi, I'm new. I'm sure you're good. We had just won 6 Effies for them. Those are the most prestigious effectiveness awards. So our work worked. I know you're good, but I've got my own people and you're fired. 42% of the agency just went poof. Nothing you can do. There's not a conversation to be had. And it wasn't about the work. You spend all your time finding these amazing, talented people and you don't want to let them go. And so what I did is I gathered everyone in the basement of the agency and I just explained the news and we shared the 6 FE case studies that we were the most awarded agency in North America for work that worked, and we just got fired for it. And I said to them, this is our work and this is who we are, and we are this good. And these are our case studies to take forward to the new clients. And now we're going to go hunt for some new stuff. We're going to refound the agency because we've just been destabilized. And so I don't care who founded the agency. I need to know who wants to refound the agency with me. I had about 15 people go, oh yeah, let's do this. So we're going to refound how we hunt. We're going to refound production. We're going to refound strategy. We just took a look at everything and said, okay, we got overdependent on somebody. And so anyway, fast forward, in 9 months, we won 11 accounts and we replaced every single dollar, and we didn't have to fire a single person or lay off a single person. But that's where the power of refounding, going, come join us. What should we be now? Because the world has changed. that's now a philosophy, Tony, I take forward and go, wait a second, the world's always changing. And we as people are always changing. So, our kids grow up and we become empty nesters. We have to refound. When I got divorced in 2015, who am I when I'm not partnered? Who am I when I'm not pretending to be happily partnered? Someone gets ill or your parents pass. Who am I when I'm not tethered? And so this idea of always refounding, where we saw that through the pandemic, is so much changed. And all businesses need to refound every 3 years or so.
I love the refounding. Now, I also want to ask about this masculine and feminine, not as a gender, but more of an energy, because it certainly must have roared through your dining room table and Kraft, but in many ways, it's kind of defined who you are and the value you bring to the world. So talk to me a little bit about masculine and feminine.
And each of us have both. And we tend to know when to flex. So masculine is accountability and it's measurement and it's goals and it's KPIs and it's achievement. And feminine energy is collaboration and it's listening and it's nurturing and it's curiosity and it's got that energy to it. The language of business is typically masculine and it's about accomplishment, it's goals and driving things and keeping things ticking. And what I learned as I went along in business is that I had grown up in a masculine household. I had Irene Rosenfeld, female in a male world, been modeled by masculine. Advertising is ultra masculine. Like Mad Men's an interesting show because it's mostly true. It's not fiction. That is what it was like. And it has still remnants of that. I learned to navigate very well in a masculine world. And I would say I overflexed. I didn't realize it. But my coach of 9 years said, it's an overused skill now. Your natural language actually is to skew to the feminine. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And this is where he taught me this. And he said, this is the language of the environments you've been in. But in 2015, I was restructuring the agency at the exec level. And he said, now that you are restructuring, let's restructure it to match your natural energy. And that is where I unlocked my leadership superpower, is then I could come as myself. But first I had to learn, who am I when I'm not actually wearing armor in a trained way? But if I get comfortable with who I am naturally, what would it be like if I brought that? And then who would I attract in my executive team that would be like that?
How's culture respond to that? Because they've grown up, as you said, and where the chords and the melody are very masculine sounding. And you're bringing out matters of the heart, curiosity and empathy and sort of that left brain and right brain working together. Do people fight it, or do they feel confident that within this sort of tall grass that you've created, that they have an ability to be part of it?
They were a bit hesitant at first. It was so foreign, but they loved it. And so what helped was my exec team, I got balanced people. So Graham Lang, who was my chief creative officer at the time, big, burly, huge biceps, bald beard, collaborative, listened, gave away credit. So he looked masculine, but he actually was he was very balanced, for example. And then like starts to attract like. And so we start having a leadership team that is kind. And we use the word kindness a lot. And I actually declared that one day to the agency. All right, new executive team, meet them, highly talented, and we're going to be kind, because this business is so hard on agencies and so hard to win. We don't need to be hard on each other. I created these classes. I called them pirate huddles. And every Thursday I said, we're not going to talk business. We're going to talk humanity. And you can come, not come, doesn't matter, but I'm going to talk about personal growth. We would talk about neuroplasticity of gratitude. When you're grateful and you choose to be grateful, what happens to your brain? When you choose to be generous, what happens to your brain? What opens up? We go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, to quote Carol Dweck's work. And this is what unlocked the agency is, well, what does it mean to be kind? What does it mean to express gratitude? And we started creating these practices and ways of speaking that were absolutely beautiful. The younger people absolutely loved it. because they felt heard, they felt seen, they felt valued. And by me talking like this and saying like, I'm having a hard day, I need to borrow someone's energy. We got a big pitch, but I don't have it today. Who's got extra? It means that they could come in vulnerable as well. And when we show up that way for each other and with honesty and humanity, it flows in. It just becomes this multiplier.
Harvard, if I have my research right, turned this into a case study.
They did.
And there's rumors there might even be a book one day talking about these pirate huddles. You have to be so proud as a leader. I mean, this masculine side of you rings off the string of awards and talks about the clients you won and David versus Goliath. But the warmth and body language that changed when you talked about pirate huddle. I don't know if you've ever seen yourself in the mirror, but it's two very different Jills. Before you get into your executive coaching, the one thing that you failed to realize that a parasite had gone into your body and you kind of ignored the symptoms because you're a Jill Nykoliation. You were changing the world. You were changing cultures. Talk to me about how long it took before you realized that this was not only threatening your career, but in fact threatened your life.
Yeah, it was 2015. And it was when I was changing my exec team and I was getting divorced and I was exhausted. I was so exhausted. And the doctors were like, oh, it's just because you're a single mom, big job, traveling the world everywhere. And I just knew in my bones, no, it's not that kind of tired. I'm tired to the core. And I'd started collapsing. Long story short, I had a parasite that had been in me, they think, for almost a decade, and that it would destroyed my microbiome. And your microbiome, of course, feeds your organs. And so my whole system was inflamed and my whole system was compromised and not working at the levels it should be. And what happened was I was using adrenaline to keep going. And because clients needed me and the staff needed me, or so we tell ourselves, right? And that's the story we tell ourselves. And I overrode it and I muscled. And what I learned was adrenaline is interesting, but when you use it too much, it fuels everything good, but it also fuels everything bad. And so they said, your parasite has gotten so strong. And so that was a big wake-up call for me. And I learned a ton, how rest is important and how you have to take care of yourself. And my doctor said to me, like, 80% of this getting better is you. I'll do the 20, I'll kill the parasite, we'll fix your organs. But 80% of wellness is lifestyle. You've got to slow down, you've got to meditate, practices for yourself, time back for people who you love, etc. So that was a big wake-up call.
It's interesting that when I first read on LinkedIn you'd become an executive coach, I went, that surprises me. Not because of what you can offer individuals, but because the stage was more one-on-one versus leading a team, leading a client. You were Joan of Arc, and suddenly now you're playing more the role of Yoda.
If your listeners are familiar with the book Strength to Strength by Professor Arthur Brooks from Harvard, he talks about how our brains change. In our mid-40s, our physiology changes, and we go from this striving, driving, million miles an hour, thriving brain called the agile brain, and we move into our crystallized intelligence. I think that's what happened during the pandemic when I was doing all these pirate huddles. I felt myself shifting and going, my favorite day is Thursday. My favorite thing. You know, we have Apple as a client. We've got CIBC. We've got amazing clients. And my favorite thing is teaching people's growth on Thursdays. And so a few things as I fell in love with the pirate huddle, I fell in love with how I felt. I was so rewarded by how people were growing, and people would write me, my staff, and say, I am a better father because of the lessons you've taught me. My marriage is better. You know, the signal for help that we created that has saved women around the world, that came out of Pirate Huddle. That's the power of talking about generosity and kindness and saying, what if we put our pencils down today and Apple can wait and Capital Group can wait and Nissan can wait? What if we helped women who are trapped in violence and we turned our skills into gratitude and generosity? That's how that came about. And so I see the power that this could do. It just feels so good. So you think about, I'm stepping into my second curve and I went, I should just go with this. I shouldn't fight it. And just like the tall grass before, I'll figure out what form it's going to be.
What do you think it's going, Jill? Because if I have any role now, it's trying to curate positivity and possibility and share it with the world. And I look at someone like you and saying, if I could bottle what you offer to those individual people and bring it to the world, wouldn't that be a lovely thing to do? How are you going to get this message out? Because I don't want to say this in any kind of disparaging or diminishing way, but I think in some ways, all you have might be wasted on a handful when there's tens of thousands, if not millions of people that could use the lessons you've learned along the way.
I leave room for magic. One thing Andrew Robertson told me way back when was, he goes, go back 5 years. Could you have imagined this moment 5 years ago? And I remember how, like, oh my gosh, so much no. And I look back, Tony, you and I go back 5 years. Could we have imagined where we are now? No. So what makes me think I can imagine the next 5 years? So leave room for so much shifting and so much to come into my world. So that's number one. Number two is I love working with people one-on-one to keep me tight and close to what are people thinking, what are people struggling with, what are the transitions they're working through. And I can also work on mass. I am crafting out a book to see if I can put my Pirate Huddle work into a book. Your listeners could follow me on LinkedIn. I put that out there. I put my LinkedIn post out once a week for just pure, again, generosity. Just here's wisdom. You don't have to be my client. You can just share. And then I work at Modern Elder Academy as well with Chip, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, let's talk about Modern Academy and Chip Conley, because I'm fascinated reading about his story. But what I understand was that you went down to simply be an observer, a student in one of his academies. And I think it was about half a cup of coffee in where somebody came over and said, you should be teaching this. Once again, there's a Ken Wong in the room going, I'm not sure I can teach this person. So tell me what you're doing with Chip and how that's going to impact people's lives in terms of positivity and possibility.
Modern Elder Academy, MEA, Wisdom School. I went there. I read about it in Arthur Brooks' book. And I thought, wow, first of all, this book feels like it was written for me. And then he says in chapter 9, no one teaches you that your brain changes in your mid-40s and onwards, except for this one school in the world, Modern Elder Academy. So I thought, this is the perfect place for me to go to put my career, this chapter down with grace and gratitude. Because I was so sure I was closing it. And I wanted to say a quiet thank you to myself. I wanted to wrap it up. And so then I could step into my next chapter, which would be human development. And so I went there. I'm taking my 30 years of consumer insight, turning it to the human. And I get to actually now he's my next Irene Rosenfeld, to be in the presence of someone who is so free and so curious. And he's all tall grass. And he's invited me to come into the tall grass and walk alongside him in whatever way I choose. And so I go, oh, wow, I will absolutely. So I teach online with them. My next week course is called Who Am I Now? Because that's a question I keep asking myself. Jill, who are you now? Am I carrying around identities that no longer serve me? Are my relationships still serving me? Are my habits, hobbies, behaviors, what I'm reading still serving me for who I am now? Do I know who my values are now? So I'm teaching that course for 5 days. And we'll see where it goes.
Well, why don't we end the interview with who are you now?
When my coach first asked me that, he goes, you don't use your job. I said, well, I'm a CEO. I'm a marketer. I'm a mother of Olivia. He goes, no, you can't use rules. I remember going, I don't understand the question. I really can't answer. Shamefully now, I can look back and wow, I really was lost. I was really attached to my work. And now I look and I say, my two leading values are growth and wholeheartedness. And I look at that, I go, I always have been fascinated by human growth, always. That's why I got into consumer insight as a 30-year career. It's what I read, it's what I study all the time. And then wholeheartedness is I now show up my whole self, not the business Jill or the compartmentalized Jill. I show up whole. And my staff saw that in the last 5 years that I worked with them. And I show up hearted. I'm vulnerable. When I see something I appreciate in anyone, a stranger or a friend, I tell them, I model that. And so I go, that's who I am now. I put those two together and I go, yeah, I take my wholehearted self and now I teach growth to others. And it's reciprocal, Tony, because it helps me grow every time I teach one of these. I just go, how lucky am I?
You know, Jill, I always end with my 3 takeaways. And sometimes I say that's an impossible task because there's so many. And I think you set the record for takeaways, but I'm going to try to frame it in 3. The first one's a bit of a cheat because it combines 2, but I love when you said forgive yourself, because there's times in life where you're not where you should be based on decisions you made, and said forgive yourself, go where you wanted. And I love the fact, I've always heard, you can't push a rope, really go where you wanted. The second is when you started to rethink logic from head to your heart, and you said, I'm going to slow things down, and I'm going to embrace my feminine energy, and I'm going to embrace listening and generosity and gratitude. And what a wonderful gift you gave to yourself, and what a wonderful gift you're giving to others. The final one came out in the last couple of minutes, is leave room for magic. There's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty in the world, but there's still a lot of magic to be had. And I think if we listen to the wisdom of Jill Nykoliation and the Jillisms that you've talked about, the tall grass and the refounding and masculine and feminine, and we do so with leaving room for magic, I think we're all going to live a better life. And so I thank you so much. So blessed that you're part of Chatter That Matters.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this, Tony. Thank you so much for having me on.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.